Mark Jacobs.
And good morning. This morning, calling us in from Washington, D.C. is Senator Jerry Moran. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Mark. Good to be with you.
How are you? Been a long time since we've had a chance to talk.
It has been, and I was reminiscing as I was listening to the broadcast before you brought me on air, and the voices sound familiar, the ads sound familiar. My days with KWBW go back to Dan Deming at a studio west of Hutchinson, and lots of good memories and lots of times we've spent on the air, just not recently.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what is going on the Hill and the reconciliation bill, a.k.a. the big, beautiful bill. It's been 7 years since there's been a farm bill passed, and the last farm bill was passed in 2018. There are some conditions in the big, beautiful bill that specifically are going to help farmers. Can you discuss a little bit of those?
Absolutely. I mean, while the big, beautiful bill has received lots of attention for mostly other reasons, the inability to get a farm bill done on a timely fashion, and I serve as a member of the Senate Agriculture Committee, farm bill is hugely important to Kansans, to Kansas agriculture, and to all the communities across our state that depend upon farmers' success in having a bright future for their community. So we were successful in adding a significant portion of what is traditionally a farm bill, and most importantly, the provisions of a farm bill that provide a safety net for farmers when circumstances make it nearly impossible for them to have a margin over and above their costs. And that's what we're seeing in Kansas and have for the last several years. Input costs, fuel, fertilizer, natural gas, labor, interest rates, all those things skyrocketing while commodity prices are low. Almost without exception, the agricultural sectors in Kansas are struggling because of that squeeze. And this bill provides the bulk of what's normally known as Title I of the Farm Bill, the safety net, which means that there is something a farmer can take to their bankers to borrow money to get the farming operations going in the new year. And so among other things in that bill that are important to Kansas, the bulk of the Farm Bill being included is one of the ones that are really important. And that's almost, I appreciate you bringing this topic up because it's almost never been talked about as the reconciliation bill was being panned across the country.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to talk to John Jenkinson a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about input versus what they're getting, and it's, to me, it sounded like they were losing a dollar a bushel on this recent wheat crop.
Last week, the Soybean Association, the Grain Sorghum Association, the Grain and Feed Dealers Association, Kansas Corn were all in the office visiting me and other members of the Kansas delegation to talk about the damaging circumstances that agriculture faces. And I know that not every Kansan is a farmer, but you don't have to. I don't know that there's a place in Kansas, and certainly in the part of Kansas that our listeners live, there's not a community that isn't affected by whether or not farmers are having some success.
Yeah, you get out west of here, you get in some of those smaller towns like Larned and Sylvia and small towns like that where they're basically farm communities, and if the farmers aren't stable, that's going to affect those small towns.
Mark, the other thing is that the drought that we've had in Kansas, and I was listening to your weather report, and it's hot and humid here, and I was in Kansas over the weekend, and it was hot and humid, and we've had rains across our state, and the drought monitor shows that the drought is moving away from us, except along the north part of Kansas, along the Nebraska border. But, man, we've had, and I also followed the water in Cheney Reservoir. I mean, things have changed dramatically in the last month or so, but the drought has been so damaging for so long that it's another factor. And there's two programs that are providing some money to farmers right now, one for their economic losses, what we talked about. In addition to this farm bill, there was emergency disaster assistance that was passed by the House and Senate last December. That money is now available, and farmers are going to their local FSA offices to sign up for disaster assistance related to weather. And almost the other provisions of that bill were implemented a bit earlier, and that was for the economic losses due to what we've just been describing. So there's emergency disaster assistance available to farmers in Kansas and across the country right now.
One last thing I'd like to touch on, and I know this is a big deal, but permanently repealing the death tax for family farms or small businesses. Can you give a little comment on that?
Sure. I mean, I've been a sponsor of almost every piece of legislation that repeals the so-called death tax, that increases the exemptions, expands the exclusions, and it's particularly it's an ag issue, but it's a business issue. We have so many businesses in Kansas that are family owned, and agriculture is a perfect example. But so are those small businesses where they are asset rich. They own lots of things that have value as an asset of the business or the farm, but the income doesn't correspond with those values. And so upon an owner's death, the estate taxes have to be paid, and too often that means selling the assets. And one of the most important things we could do for the future of our state is to make certain that small family businesses across Kansas have a future. Small family farms, actually even larger family farms, have a future in Kansas, and that you don't have to sell when mom and dad die those assets to pay the government their taxes. And so it's a value to us as far as keeping businesses in rural Kansas, in small communities across our state, and supporting agriculture. But it's also, there's a fairness because you paid taxes when you earned the money to buy the asset, and then at the date of your death, you have to value your assets and figure out what the tax is. Those assets, the income to purchase those assets have already been taxed.
All right, sir. We are talking with Senator Jerry Moran. He is joining us via phone from Washington, D.C. We'll take a short break. We'll be back right after this. And we're back with Senator Jerry Moran. He is joining us via phone from Washington, D.C. I know there was some concern among the older people in the state of Kansas about Medicare reform. So can you tell me how Medicare reform is being affected by the big, beautiful bill?
Well, I think the way to describe that, I mean, I would highlight or point out that there are two aspects that people worry about and should rightfully be concerned about. One is Medicaid, and that's a program the federal government shares with states across the country. Medicaid is a way of helping people sometimes with disabilities, but also just low-income folks with access to health care. And then Medicare is the longer-term program, a federal program that is designed to help people in their senior years access health care. And I don't think we have any worries about what the so-called big, beautiful deal did in regard to Medicare. It was pretty much hands-off, don't touch Medicare. And the issues that we worried about in regard to Medicaid changes, what the Senate and House and what the bill did is to say that people in the future, not people who are currently receiving Medicaid, people in the future who apply for Medicaid will not be eligible if they are here illegally, and they will not be eligible for Medicaid unless they are willing, if they can work, are willing to work and do work. And that work requirement is 80 hours a month, and there's a component and it's all affected by whether or not you have family members you're caring for, whether you're going to school. But basically what was added to Medicaid provisions is for the future, the recipients will not be eligible. Those who apply for Medicaid will not be eligible if they are here illegally or if they are unwilling to work when they are able to work. And then the other component of particularly Medicaid is, again, we talked about rural Kansas, rural America. If you care about rural America, I mean, I have about 5 things I talk about because one of the primary motivations for me to ask Kansans to give me the chance to represent them in the nation's capital is how do we do things in Washington that aren't negative to things in Kansas, particularly in rural Kansas, because I want my hometown and everybody else's hometown who are listening to this to have a bright future. And access to health care, particularly for seniors, Medicaid, Medicare, or otherwise, is hugely important. And while we talked about farmers and ranchers being important, also keeping our hospital doors open, pharmacy on Main Street, all those professional services that we need in communities to keep senior citizens able to stay in their hometowns and young families to decide that town is a desirable place for them to raise their kids. And in this case, in regard to Medicaid, which is a component of how hospitals get revenue, we were successful in pushing back the reductions in Medicaid. They don't take place until 2008, and we drafted the bill in a way that allows Kansas, the state of Kansas, to apply for additional Medicaid reimbursements in our state for the future. In fact, for the next 10 years. And so those programs may not have been available had we not intervened to make certain that the dates were set such that Kansas could still apply for something could still receive something that applied for months ago, and still have the chance to apply for something that the legislature passed to help critical access hospitals, those hospitals in our smallest communities, to have the ability to get additional revenue from Medicaid. A long kind of complicated story, but the reality is Kansas will now have the capability of an additional $4.9 billion over the next 10 years in Medicaid reimbursements, and critical access hospitals are included in that. We also created a hugely funded program for rural hospitals in the country, and it's expected that Kansas will be able to access significant dollars in that fund as well. So I just want to tie this together. Medicare and Medicaid are important to Kansans, and they are important. Medicaid, in this case, which was considered and addressed by the reconciliation bill, was designed to make certain that nothing happens damaging to our hospitals for the next several years. And at the end of that several years, there's additional dollars coming from other sources should something be necessary to keep those hospital doors open. I'm all in on making sure we have access to health care in rural Kansas.
All right, Senator, I thank you for your time this morning. We've been talking with Senator Jerry Moran about some provisions of the big, beautiful bill. I have lots more questions I could ask, so we'll get together and we'll figure out another time I can get you on the air. But I appreciate your time. We'll have more BW News right after this minute.